A normal flight across America suddenly lands 3 hours earlier than expected. What happened during that mysterious time turns everything upside down. Secrets are revealed, danger unfolds, and a fight for the truth begins. Stick around to hear the full story from takeoff to an unexpected, hopeful ending. Before we get started, tell me where you're watching from and leave a comment down below. Jake Thompson sat in the bustling terminal at JFK Airport, the familiar hum of hurried travelers filling the air as announcements crackled intermittently overhead. He adjusted the collar of his crisp white shirt, checked the time on his smartwatch, and glanced toward the gate where Flight 287 to Chicago was about to board. Business trips were routine for Jake, a project manager for a tech firm, and this particular flight seemed just another notch in his busy week. His mind was already swimming through the day's agenda, the meetings he had to lead, the emails he needed to send. The pressure of deadlines weighed heavily, but the airplane ride offered a brief moment of detachment, a chance to prepare. The gate agents called for boarding in orderly groups. Jake joined the queue, the soft murmur of passengers blending with the distant wail of jets taxiing on the runway. He was a regular flyer, well acquainted with the rhythms of airport life. Stepping onto the plane, he offered a polite nod to the flight attendants who smiled professionally, already anticipating the hours ahead. Settling into seat 12C, Jake pulled out his laptop and began reviewing a presentation, the familiar sounds of seatbelts clicking and overhead bins closing surrounding him. Outside, the sun was dipping low over the horizon, casting a warm golden glow on the tarmac. The engines roared to life, and the plane smoothly pushed back from a gate. A gentle vibration ran through the cabin as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Jake's thoughts were elsewhere, lost in figures and charts, when the pilot's voice came over the intercom with the usual calm professionalism, announcing a timely departure and an expected arrival in Chicago within 3 hours. Nothing about this moment suggested that the routine was about to be broken. As the plane lifted gracefully into the evening sky, the cityscape of New York shrank beneath them, lights twinkling like stars scattered on earth. The flight attendants began their service, the clinks of carts and polite inquiries providing a comforting soundtrack. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the faint hum of conversation. Around him, passengers settled in various states of relaxation, some chatting quietly, others scrolling through phones or settling down for a nap. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the subtle thrill of being in the air, detached from the city's chaos. He glanced out the window, watching clouds drift lazily by, and for a moment, the worries of his workload melted away. The sky outside was serene, a deepening blue fading to purple, and the plane held steady, cutting a clear path through the calm. The flight was progressing exactly as planned, smooth, uneventful, ordinary. Jake's thoughts drifted between work and home, imagining the familiar comfort of his Chicago apartment waiting for him. The steady rhythm of the flight, the soft chatter of passengers, the occasional laughter of children, all created a cocoon of normalcy. But beneath this placid surface, something unseen was already shifting. In the quiet moments, Jake noticed subtle changes. A few passengers exchanging furtive glances, a flight attendant pausing just a little too long at the galley, the captain's voice cutting in once more, a touch too precise, too measured. Yet, in the absence of any overt sign, Jake pushed these thoughts aside. This was a routine flight. Nothing out of the ordinary should happen now. As the plane cruised steadily, the hum of the engines seemed to synchronize with the heartbeat of everyone on board, a collective rhythm of expectation and trust. Passengers leaned back, some closed their eyes, others typed away on their devices. Jake felt a strange comfort in this shared stillness, strangers bound together on a journey across the skies. And then, just as the city lights of Chicago should have begun to approach on the horizon, the captain's voice sliced through the quiet, crisp and unexpected, shattering the illusion of a normal flight. But that would come in the next part. For now, Jake remained oblivious, wrapped in the deceptive calm of a flight that had taken off normally, but was about to land 3 hours earlier than anyone could have anticipated. Jake had just closed his laptop, ready to rest for a moment, when the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but firm, breaking through the gentle hum of the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Indianapolis, Indiana. We expect to be on the ground within the next 20 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding." The announcement caught Jake off guard. Indianapolis? That wasn't the planned destination. The original flight path aimed directly for Chicago O'Hare, where he was due for an important meeting. The cabin shifted from quiet focus to a buzz of murmurs, passengers exchanging confused looks and whispered questions. Jake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what this meant. No explanation followed immediately, leaving the tension to grow like a silent wave. He glanced around to gauge the reactions of those seated near him. A woman across the aisle clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles pale. A man beside the window stared out blankly, seemingly trying to rationalize the sudden change of course. Jake's mind raced. Was this a mechanical issue, a security threat, or something else entirely? Flight attendants moved through the aisles, their smiles steady, but eyes betraying a hint of unease. When one passed by, Jake asked softly, "Any idea why we're diverting?" She shook her head, offering a polite, "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any more information at this time." The lack of transparency only fueled the growing anxiety within the cabin. Outside the windows, the landscape began to change rapidly. The city skyline faded, replaced by stretches of flat farmland and highways leading to Indianapolis. Jake pressed his forehead against the cool glass, heart beating faster as the plane descended swiftly. The usual calm routine of a flight was now replaced by an uneasy silence, punctuated by the occasional cough or whispered speculation. Passengers glanced at their phones, searching for news updates, but found nothing about any incidents or emergencies. Jake's own screen was blank, disconnected from the outside world. As the plane's wheels touched down with a gentle bump on the tarmac, a collective breath was held, then released. The plane taxied slowly to a remote gate far from the main terminal, away from the usual hustle of arriving flights. The pilot's voice returned, this time more reassuring, but still vague. "We will remain on the ground for the time being as technicians perform necessary inspections. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Jake exchanged a look with Sarah, a woman sitting nearby who had also been watching the strange developments with increasing concern. They didn't know each other's names yet, but the shared uncertainty created an unspoken bond. The overhead lights dimmed slightly, a subtle signal that the plane was now in an unexpected holding pattern. In the minutes that followed, whispers filled the cabin like static on a radio. Some passengers speculated about mechanical failure, others wondered about weather disruptions, though the skies outside were clear. Jake's mind kept circling back to the pilot's tone. Too precise, too controlled, like someone trying to hide a deeper problem. His eyes caught the crew huddled in the galley, speaking in hushed tones, their faces serious. One flight attendant glanced briefly at Jake, then quickly looked away. There was a tension in the air that felt almost tangible. The usual airline announcements, cheerful and routine, were replaced by silence. Jake's heartbeat quickened as he imagined the possibilities. Was there a security threat on board? Had the plane been hijacked? Was this an act of terrorism or a technical malfunction? The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving a hollow pit in his stomach. He looked again out the window. The plane sat alone on the tarmac, surrounded by empty gates and waiting vehicles. No other planes were nearby. The sun was setting behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the runway. For a moment, Jake felt isolated, trapped in a situation spiraling out of his control. But amidst the unease, a spark of determination flickered inside him. He would not simply sit and wait for answers. If something was wrong, he wanted to know what it was for himself and for everyone on this flight. The unexpected landing in Indianapolis was more than just a change of plans. It was the first sign that this flight was no longer ordinary. Something was unfolding, and Jake was caught right in the middle of it. The cabin remained unusually still, the hum of the engines now a dull drone rather than the steady reassurance Jake had grown accustomed to. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting nervously around the cramped space. The overhead bins were closed tightly, the usual hustle of people stretching or standing for a moment replaced by tense silence. Jake felt the atmosphere thicken, a collective unease wrapping around everyone like a fog. The crew had ceased their usual rounds, instead gathering in small groups near the galley, speaking in hushed, urgent whispers. Jake could barely make out fragments of their conversations. Words like security protocol, inspection, and authorization floated through the air, vague but ominous. He exchanged a glance with Sarah, the woman seated beside him, whose brows were furrowed with worry. Neither had spoken since the unexpected announcement, but in that moment, silence was a shared language. Jake leaned slightly toward Sarah and whispered, "Do you think it's something serious?" She hesitated before replying, her voice low but steady. "I don't know, but it doesn't feel like a simple mechanical problem." Around them, other passengers were trying to mask their fear with polite smiles or distracted conversation, but Jake could see the tension etched into their faces. Children clung to parents, elderly passengers stared fixedly at the windows, and some young travelers pulled out their phones, desperate for news that simply wasn't there. The cabin's usual warmth had turned cold with uncertainty. Minutes stretched endlessly as the plane remained parked on the tarmac. Jake glanced once more at the crew, noticing how their usual composed demeanor was replaced by tight jaws and guarded eyes. One flight attendant, a woman with dark hair tied in a tight bun, suddenly caught Jake's gaze and quickly looked away. It was clear something was wrong, something they weren't allowed to explain. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom again, breaking the silence but offering no comfort. "We are currently conducting a thorough inspection of the aircraft. For your safety, please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. Further updates will be provided as soon as possible." The robotic calm in his tone only deepened the mystery. Jake's mind raced to piece together what little he knew. What kind of inspection could take this long? And why divert to a city not even on the flight path? He replayed the landing over and over in his head. The sharp descent, the remote gate, the distant appearance of uniformed men outside the windows. His gut told him this was more than a routine check. He noticed passengers casting anxious glances toward the cockpit door, as if hoping for a glimpse of answers that weren't coming. Nearby, a group of business travelers whispered nervously about terrorism, their speculation adding fuel to the fire of fear. Sarah nudged him gently, her eyes wide. "Did you see that guy over there?" she whispered, nodding toward a man seated near the back, clutching a large duffel bag. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he shifted in his seat. The man avoided eye contact and kept to himself, drawing more attention as the minutes dragged on. Jake's curiosity piqued. Something about the man's behavior didn't sit right. The bag looked heavy, almost out of place on a passenger flight. Jake felt a flicker of unease that this man might be connected to whatever was happening. The flight attendants had now started a quiet but systematic walk down the aisles, scanning passengers as if searching for something or someone. Jake's heart pounded as the woman with the bun approached the man with the duffel bag. Their brief conversation was inaudible, but the man's face tightened, his shoulders stiffened, and he nodded reluctantly. Soon after, a security officer boarded, their presence shifting the mood from anxious to fearful. Passengers whispered urgently, eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Jake's thoughts spiraled. Was this the reason for the emergency landing? Was the man a threat? Or was he just another scared passenger caught in a nightmare? As the plane sat immobilized on the tarmac, the line between safety and danger blurred. Every moment stretched longer, every look exchanged heavier with suspicion. The once routine flight had transformed into a silent suspense thriller, and Jake, like everyone else on board, was trapped in the unknown. Hours crept by like slow-moving shadows as the passengers remained confined within the plane's narrow aisles and windowed walls. The initial tension had matured into a heavy, restless silence, punctuated only by the occasional shuffling of feet or the whispered conversations that tried to fill the growing void of uncertainty. Jake found himself sitting rigidly, the earlier shock now replaced by a gnawing impatience. He glanced towards Sarah, whose calm exterior was beginning to crack, worry etched deeply across her face. The flight attendants circulated with carefully rehearsed politeness, but offered no new information. The phrase, technical issue, was repeated mechanically, but it felt like a fragile mask covering a much darker truth. Jake observed the passengers around him, their behaviors shifting with the delay. A mother tried to soothe a crying toddler, her voice shaky but determined. An elderly man stared out the window, eyes glazed and distant, lost in his own thoughts. A group of teenagers whispered about the inconvenience, nervously laughing to keep the mood light. Yet beneath all these facades, Jake sensed a collective unease growing. People were beginning to realize this was no ordinary delay. The plane was effectively trapped, a small world in limbo, hovering far from the destination. His gaze drifted back to the mysterious man with the duffel bag, still seated quietly near the back. The man's face was pale, beads of sweat gathering at his temples despite the cool cabin air. Occasionally, his eyes flicked toward the crew and security personnel who now moved with increased vigilance. Jake couldn't help but wonder what secrets the bag held, and whether they were connected to the unusual situation unfolding around them. Sarah, who had been watching the man as well, leaned closer and whispered, "There's something off about him. We should keep an eye." Jake nodded, a silent agreement forming between them. Meanwhile, the pilot's voice echoed through the cabin again, steady but lacking the warmth of earlier announcements. "We appreciate your patience as our team continues with necessary protocols. For your safety, please remain seated and follow all instructions. We will provide updates as soon as possible." The repetition of these vague statements only fueled rumors and speculation. Jake caught snippets of conversations, words like security breach, emergency response, and Protocol 47 floating in the air, unconfirmed but unsettling. The hours stretched on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. Passengers grew restless, some pacing the aisles when allowed, others pulling out their phones to connect with worried family members. The cabin lights dimmed to conserve power, deepening the surreal atmosphere. Jake's thoughts raced. He felt a strange mix of frustration and fear, a desperate need to understand what was happening, and a growing awareness that this flight was caught in something far beyond a simple technical glitch. Sarah, sensing Jake's growing anxiety, reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "We're in this together," she said softly. That small gesture brought a flicker of comfort in the growing darkness of uncertainty. Jake nodded gratefully, feeling a spark of human connection amidst the cold tension. Suddenly, the door to the cockpit opened briefly, and a crew member stepped out, speaking hurriedly with the flight attendants. The quick exchange was filled with urgency, eyes darting around nervously. Jake's pulse quickened. Whatever was going on was escalating. A few moments later, the captain's voice came on again, but this time it was followed by footsteps outside the plane, security personnel moving with purpose. The passengers tensed. The plane felt more like a cage than ever before. Jake and Sarah exchanged a glance. They both knew the wait was far from over, and whatever lay ahead would change everything. The low murmur of voices outside the aircraft was like a distant storm rolling closer, sending ripples of unease through the cabin. Jake's heart thudded against his ribs as he watched from his seat near the middle of the plane, where the dimmed overhead lights cast long shadows over tense faces. Passengers clutched their belongings tightly, eyes darting nervously toward the windows as shadows moved on the tarmac. The air grew thick with a heavy silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of shoes against the floor and the occasional whispered exchange among crew members. Sarah sat beside Jake, her gaze fixed on the rear of the plane where a small group of uniformed security officers had boarded. Their presence was unnerving, stern faces behind dark sunglasses, bodies rigid and alert, each carrying radios and unexplained equipment. They moved methodically through the aisles, scanning the rows of passengers with sharp, searching eyes. Jake noticed how the man with the duffel bag shrank slightly under their gaze, fingers tightening around the strap of his bag, as if it were his only shield. The captain's voice cut through the tension once more, this time with an unusual edge of formality. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security concern, we must ask that everyone remain seated and cooperate fully with the personnel on board. We understand this is an inconvenience and appreciate your compliance. His tone left no room for questions. Jake felt a chill. The word security concern echoed ominously in the confined space, confirming the worst fears circling in everyone's minds. Whispers erupted anew. Some passengers speculated about a possible threat on board. Others wondered if the diversion was due to an external event. The atmosphere thickened, a mix of fear and frustration pressing down on the crowded cabin. Jake glanced around, catching glimpses of wide eyes and pale faces. Even the flight attendants looked strained, their usual reassuring smiles replaced by thin, tense lines. Jake shifted in his seat, trying to steady his breathing. He looked again at the man with the duffel bag. The man's jaw was tight, his expression guarded but not overtly hostile. Jake wondered what secrets that bag held. His curiosity mingled with a growing sense of urgency. Something about this situation felt off, deeper than just a security scare. He could sense layers beneath the surface that no one was willing to reveal. Suddenly, a sharp metallic clink broke the hushed tension. Jake turned toward the sound, just as the security officers began moving passengers one by one toward the rear of the plane. Their movements were precise, practiced, not chaotic but purposeful. A woman near the front protested softly, asking what was happening, but was quickly hushed by a stern officer. Jake's pulse quickened. He realized that the man with the duffel bag was the focus of the officer's attention. The man was asked to stand and move toward the back. He did so slowly, eyes flickering nervously between the officers and the passengers. The tension in the cabin became almost unbearable. Sarah leaned closer to Jake, whispering, "This is it, something's really wrong." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. As the officers escorted the man off the plane through the rear door, a hush fell. The sudden removal of that one figure seemed to shift the atmosphere, but not toward relief. Instead, a new wave of questions surged through the passengers' minds. Who was he? What was in the bag? Why had the plane landed in Indianapolis instead of Chicago? The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with uncertainty. Jake's mind raced. He wanted to stand up, to demand answers, but the tight grip of authority on the plane prevented any such movement. The flight attendants exchanged quick looks, clearly waiting for the captain's next move. The tension was a living thing, wrapping its fingers around every soul on board. Minutes passed like hours. Jake felt trapped, suspended in a nightmare where nothing made sense, and every moment brought more questions than answers. Outside, the night deepened, the plane isolated on the empty tarmac, a solitary island in the dark. Inside, the passengers waited, caught between fear and hope, between the known and the terrifying unknown. The atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted dramatically after the man with the duffel bag was escorted off the plane. A tense silence blanketed the passengers, broken only by the occasional nervous whisper or shuffling movement. Jake leaned back in his seat, his mind racing, replaying every detail of the unfolding drama. The unknown weighed heavily on everyone. Questions hung in the stale air like thick fog. Who was that man? What was in his bag? Why had the plane diverted so suddenly? The answers felt just beyond reach, locked away behind closed cockpit doors and the tight lips of the crew. Sarah, sitting beside him, glanced around nervously before whispering, "I don't like this, Jake. It feels like something bigger is happening, something they're not telling us." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the calm she was trying to maintain. Jake nodded, sharing her unease. Passengers near them exchanged furtive glances, their faces pale and drawn. Some clutched their phones, desperately searching for any news updates. The blackout of information only fed the growing anxiety. Jake's thoughts drifted to the pilot's earlier words, security concern. That phrase stuck like a warning. The flight attendants had resumed their duties, but their smiles were strained, their eyes flicking toward the cockpit and the rear door with guarded suspicion. The usual hum of normalcy was replaced by a palpable tension, like the air before a storm breaks. No one spoke loudly. The cabin felt like a delicate glass orb ready to shatter. Suddenly, a soft murmur began, spreading like wildfire through the rows. Passengers shared theories, ranging from a potential bomb threat to a suspicious passenger, or even something more sinister like an attempted hijacking thwarted at the last moment. Jake listened to these whispers, his mind wrestling with the possibilities. None felt reassuring. The man with the duffel bag had been the focus, but now he was gone, taken off the plane without explanation. What if he wasn't acting alone? What if the threat was still here? Sarah caught Jake's eye, her expression grim. "We need to stay alert," she whispered urgently. "Something tells me this isn't over." Jake nodded, a knot tightening in his stomach. The idea that danger lurked somewhere among the passengers was chilling. He scanned the cabin again, tried to identify anyone who seemed out of place, anyone whose nervous glances or twitching movements set off alarms in his mind. The hours dragged on, time blurring as the plane remained stationary. Outside, the fading light of dusk gave way to the deep blues of night. Jake's eyelids grew heavy, but the tension kept his mind sharp and restless. He wondered if they would ever learn the truth, or if they were condemned to wait in this limbo, caught between fear and hope. The only certainty was that the flight had changed irreversibly, and nothing would ever be the same again. The dim cabin lights flickered slightly as the minutes stretched into hours. The passengers sat in tense silence, each lost in their own swirling thoughts. Jake felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. He kept stealing glances toward the rear of the plane, where the man with the duffel bag had been escorted off, wondering what secrets lay behind the closed door. Suddenly, the door opened again, and a different man was brought on board, this time calm, but with an air of quiet urgency. The newcomer was a middle-aged man in a plain jacket, his eyes tired but clear, carrying no visible weapons or luggage. The security officers introduced him to the captain, and soon he was allowed to walk down the aisle, stopping briefly to speak to passengers. Jake caught his eye as the man passed by and felt an odd sense of recognition. Or maybe it was just the desperate need for answers that made him latch onto this stranger. The man sat down near the front and cleared his throat before addressing the cabin in a voice both steady and grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Detective Mark Collins with the Federal Aviation Security Task Force. I know this situation has been difficult and confusing. I want to assure you that your safety is our highest priority." His words brought a brief ripple of murmurs and cautious relief. Jake's heart pounded as he listened, hoping this was finally the moment to understand the mystery. Detective Collins explained that earlier in the flight, an alert was triggered regarding a suspicious item on board, a bag left unattended and believed to pose a potential threat. "We diverted to Indianapolis to conduct a full security inspection," he said. "The man removed from the plane is currently being questioned by authorities. We have no confirmed threat at this time, but we cannot take any chances." The detective's calm demeanor helped ease some tension, but the underlying fear lingered like a shadow. Jake glanced around the cabin, noting how the passengers' faces reflected a mix of relief and ongoing anxiety. Some whispered prayers, others wiped sweat from their brows. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand, whispering, "At least we know something now." Yet even as Detective Collins spoke, Jake sensed the story was far from over. The detective's tone was measured, and his eyes flickered with a hidden worry, as if guarding a secret. "While we continue to investigate, I ask for your cooperation and patience," Collins continued. "We will do everything possible to ensure the rest of your journey is safe and comfortable." His words, though reassuring, carried a weight that unsettled Jake. It was clear that whatever had happened was serious, and that the calm now was fragile. As Detective Collins finished, the captain's voice returned, promising updates as they came. Jake let out a slow breath, trying to steady his nerves. The plane was no longer just a means of travel. It was a crucible of tension, a place where lives were caught between routine and crisis. Jake looked at Sarah and felt grateful for her presence, a small anchor in the storm of uncertainty. The stranger's story had opened a window into the unknown, but Jake knew the journey ahead would still be filled with questions and challenges. The night outside deepened, and inside the cabin, the passengers waited, united by fear, hope, and the fragile thread of trust in those who held their safety in their hands. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted once more after Detective Collins' announcement. A cautious calm settled among the passengers, but beneath the surface, unease lingered like a silent storm ready to break. Jake felt the tension tightening around him, his eyes drawn to the back of the plane, where the rear door remained firmly closed. Something about the whole situation felt unfinished, a puzzle missing its last piece. Just as Jake was about to lean back and close his eyes for a brief rest, a commotion near the rear caught his attention. Several flight attendants and security personnel were gathered around a young woman who had just boarded the plane through the rear entrance. Her expression was urgent, her steps quick and purposeful as she made her way down the aisle. The passengers turned to watch as she stopped to speak with the captain and Detective Collins. Jake's curiosity piqued as he overheard fragments of their conversation. Words like inside information, urgent, and must speak privately. The cabin's silence deepened again, the passengers holding their breath as the woman was led to a small area near the cockpit. Moments later, she addressed the cabin with a voice steady but filled with urgency. "I'm Lisa Harper, an investigator with Homeland Security. We've uncovered new evidence regarding the man with the duffel bag." The words sent a ripple through the cabin. Lisa's revelation was startling. The duffel bag did not contain explosives or weapons, but something far more disturbing: classified documents stolen from a government agency. "We believe this individual was attempting to smuggle sensitive information out of the country," she explained. "The documents have national security implications, which is why the flight was diverted." Jake's mind reeled at the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary security scare. This was espionage on American soil. Lisa continued, "Our team is working to ensure the safety of all passengers and to retrieve the stolen materials. We ask for your continued patience and cooperation." The tone was firm yet reassuring, but Jake sensed the urgency lurking beneath her calm exterior. The stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. The reality of the situation hit them like a wave. They were caught in the middle of a high-stakes security operation, their flight transformed into a battleground for secrets that could impact the nation. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The familiar routine of flying had been shattered, replaced by an invisible tension that bound everyone together. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand tightly. "This changes everything," she whispered. Jake nodded, realizing that their journey was no longer just about reaching a destination. It was about surviving an unfolding crisis. The night outside deepened, shadows pooling beneath the plane as if mirroring the dark truths now exposed inside. Lisa's presence brought a new dimension to the ordeal, a reminder that beyond the walls of the plane, powerful forces were at work. Jake's thoughts raced, questions flooding his mind. How had the man acquired the documents? Were there others involved? What happened next? The cabin settled into a tense silence, the passengers digesting the shocking news. The flight crew moved efficiently, their professionalism unwavering despite the gravity of the situation. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. They were no longer just passengers. They were witnesses to a story far bigger than themselves. As the plane remained grounded, the investigation pressed on. Outside, the night held its secrets, but inside, the passengers braced for whatever was coming next, knowing that their ordinary flight had become something extraordinary and dangerous. Following Lisa Harper's unsettling revelation, the atmosphere on board shifted again, this time edged with urgency and heightened vigilance. Passengers exchanged worried glances, the weight of espionage settling heavily in the cramped cabin. Jake could feel it too. The once familiar environment of a routine flight now pulsed with palpable tension and suspicion. Everyone was suddenly a potential witness, maybe even a suspect. The security team, now bolstered by Homeland Security agents, began a meticulous search of the plane, each step amplified in significance. The crew's usual friendly demeanor was replaced with steely professionalism. They moved with purpose, checking overhead compartments, under seats, and scrutinizing every inch of the cabin. Jake observed one attendant carefully inspecting a seat pocket as if it might hide a secret. The passengers watched silently, a mix of anxiety and helplessness washing over them. Jake's eyes kept darting to the man who had been removed earlier, now just a shadow in the back of his mind. Was he acting alone, or was this part of something much larger? Sarah, sitting beside Jake, whispered, "It feels like we're under a microscope." Jake nodded silently, feeling the truth of her words. The security officers systematically questioned passengers, verifying identities and probing for any odd behavior. Jake answered calmly when approached, but noticed the subtle glances and cautious tone, as if everyone on board was under suspicion until proven innocent. Suddenly, a tense hush fell over the cabin as a crew member announced that a suspicious package had been found in one of the overhead bins. The cabin collectively held its breath. The security team quickly converged, carefully inspecting the bag. After a tense moment, the package was revealed to contain nothing dangerous, just personal belongings. The relief was palpable but fleeting. The passengers knew the danger could be anywhere. Jake's thoughts wandered to the documents Lisa had mentioned. He wondered how sensitive information had ended up on a commercial flight. The implications were chilling. Someone was trying to smuggle secrets right under the nose of the authorities. He felt a mixture of fear and fascination, the story unfolding around him like a thriller he never wanted to be part of. As the search continued, Jake noticed a woman nervously clutching her purse, avoiding eye contact with the security officers. Something about her behavior seemed off. Sarah caught his gaze and nodded toward the woman. "Should we say something?" Jake hesitated, unsure if he was imagining things or if his instincts were right. Before he could act, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, announcing that the investigation would continue for some time and asking for everyone's patience and cooperation. The uncertainty stretched the limits of their endurance. Outside, the night deepened, the plane still isolated on the tarmac, a silent island in the dark. Jake and Sarah exchanged a look, both knowing that this flight had become a crucible of fear, secrets, and survival. They braced themselves for whatever came next, understanding that the ordinary journey they had expected was now a story of suspense and unexpected danger. The search of the aircraft dragged on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. The cabin was thick with tension and whispered speculations, passengers nervously scanning each other, unsure who to trust. Jake sat rigid in his seat, every nerve on edge. He noticed the woman they'd both been watching, her hands trembling as she clutched a small leather pouch close to her chest, eyes darting furtively whenever security officers passed by. Something about her behavior made Jake's instinct scream that she was hiding more than just nerves. As the agents methodically inspected the plane, Jake's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information he'd gathered since the flight's unsettling diversion. The stolen classified documents, the man with the duffel bag, the tense atmosphere, all pointed toward a deeper conspiracy. But what was the real motive behind this dangerous game, unfolding miles above the ground? Suddenly, an agent called out near the rear exit, holding up a small, folded piece of paper. The voice that carried through the cabin was calm but urgent. "Found this during the search." Jake leaned forward, curiosity piercing through the fog of anxiety. The agent carefully unfolded the paper, revealing a series of numbers and letters. A cryptic code, nothing immediately understandable to the untrained eye. Lisa Harper stepped forward quickly, her face hardening as she examined the note. "This could be a key piece of evidence," she said quietly. "We need to analyze this further." The passengers exchanged bewildered looks, but Jake felt a surge of hope. Maybe this clue would finally unlock the mystery that had engulfed their flight. Jake glanced back at the nervous woman with the leather pouch. His gut told him the note was connected to her somehow. The woman's gaze met his briefly, a flash of fear or guilt passing through her eyes before she quickly looked away. Sarah whispered, "Do you think she knows more than she's letting on?" Jake nodded, the feeling growing stronger. The agents secured the note and intensified their questioning, turning their focus on the woman. She was escorted discreetly to a private area near the cockpit for further questioning. The tension in the cabin tightened like a noose. Passengers shifted uneasily, aware that the ordeal was far from over. Jake's mind whirled with questions. Who had written the note? Was it a code? A message? And how did it relate to the stolen documents? The pieces seemed to be coming together, but the full picture remained frustratingly out of reach. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, promising updates and assuring passengers that their safety was the top priority. Jake felt the weight of those words, but knew that the night's events were just beginning. Outside, the sky was pitch black, the plane a lone vessel in the vast expanse. Jake squeezed Sarah's hand, drawing strength from her steady presence. Together, they braced for whatever truths and dangers lay ahead, knowing that the flight that took off normally had already changed course into something far more unpredictable and chilling. The interrogation room near the cockpit was small, cramped, and heavy with silence. Jake, sitting in his seat not far away, could almost feel the weight of the moments unfolding behind those closed doors. The woman, her name tag read Emily, was the focus of intense questioning. To the passengers, she had been an enigma since boarding, her nervous demeanor and furtive glances setting her apart. Now, under the scrutiny of Homeland Security agents, every secret she held was under threat of exposure. Back in the cabin, whispers had grown into murmurs of suspicion. Faces turned, eyes narrowed. Everyone wondered, was Emily the mastermind or an innocent pawn caught in the web? Jake watched as a stewardess discreetly passed a note from one passenger to another. Rumors and theories spun faster than the plane's engines could hum. Sarah leaned in close to Jake, voice low. What if she's innocent? What if she's being framed? Jake shook his head slowly. Maybe, but with that code found, and her strange behavior, it's hard not to suspect. The doubt in his voice matched the unease in his heart. The flight was no longer a journey, but a crucible testing trust and truth. Suddenly, the captain's voice cut through the tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an update. The cabin fell silent instantly. After consulting with law enforcement and security officials on the ground, we will be making a controlled search of all carry-on luggage. This is precautionary. Your cooperation is appreciated. The announcement tightened the already taut nerves in the cabin. Passengers reluctantly prepared to comply, the ordeal far from over. Jake's mind flashed back to Emily's trembling hands and the mysterious leather pouch. What could she possibly be hiding? As the search began, passengers pulled bags from overhead bins and beneath seats, their movements slow and deliberate, eyes darting suspiciously at one another. The security agents worked efficiently, their faces grim but professional. Jake felt an unsettling mix of fear and fascination watching the process. Each open bag was a new revelation, each uncovered item a potential clue or a dead end. A child's toy, a paperback novel, bottles of water, normalcy amid chaos. Suddenly, an agent called out from several rows ahead. Hold on, we found something. The cabin stiffened as the agent held up a small USB drive. It was discovered in Emily's bag. The room seemed to contract, all eyes fixed on the device. Lisa Harper quickly approached and examined the item with careful hands. This could be significant, Lisa murmured. We'll need to analyze the data immediately. The implications were clear. Emily's secret was far more than mere nervousness. She was involved somehow. But was she a victim or a villain? Jake felt the tension coil tighter inside him. As the USB was secured, the captain once again spoke. We appreciate your patience and understanding. We're doing everything possible to resolve this safely and swiftly. Outside, The plane remained motionless on the tarmac, the night deepening like a shroud. Jake reached for Sarah's hand, their fingers intertwining for comfort and courage. The flight that had taken off so normally now felt like a world away from the ordinary. In this suspended moment, shadows of doubt danced across the cabin, and the true story remained hidden, waiting to be revealed. The cabin remained silent, tension thick enough to cut through as the agents hurried to examine the contents of the USB drive. Lisa Harper and two tech specialists had taken the device to a secure area near the cockpit. Jake could see their serious expressions through the small window, their faces illuminated by the bluish glow of a laptop screen. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the passengers waited, each breath held in anxious anticipation. Sarah whispered, "Do you think this will finally explain everything?" Jake nodded, though his mind swirled with uncertainty. What could possibly be on that small device? How deeply did the mystery run? The flight was no longer just a disruption. It was a revelation of hidden dangers. Suddenly, Lisa returned, her face grave yet controlled. "We've uncovered classified documents, files related to a government project. Someone on board was attempting to leak sensitive information." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, passengers shifting uncomfortably as the gravity of the situation settled over them like a dark cloud. Emily was escorted back to her seat, now under close watch. She looked exhausted, a mixture of fear and resignation etched on her face. Jake wondered if she was the mastermind or merely a pawn caught in a dangerous game she never wanted to play. The layers of deception seemed to deepen with every moment. As the investigation progressed, Lisa addressed the passengers again. "We are coordinating with ground authorities to ensure a safe resolution. For now, the plane will remain here until further notice." The announcement was met with a mix of relief and frustration. The ordeal was far from over, but at least the passengers were no longer left in the dark. Jake looked out the window at the quiet runway, reflecting on how ordinary the evening had begun. A simple flight now shadowed by secrets and danger, the familiar sky transformed into a stage for an unfolding drama. He turned to Sarah, finding strength in her steady presence, a reminder that even in darkness, hope endured. The hours dragged on as the plane waited, the night outside deepening. Inside, passengers whispered theories and prayers, their faces illuminated by dim cabin lights. Jake felt the weight of the unknown pressing down, but also a growing resolve. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The cabin was unusually still as the hours wore on, shadows lengthening under the soft glow of the overhead lights. Emily sat quietly, eyes downcast, the weight of her secret pressing heavily upon her. Jake could see the tension etched in every line of her face. What had once been an ordinary flight was now a stage for revelations that no one could have anticipated. Suddenly, the door near the cockpit opened, and Lisa Harper stepped into the cabin. Her expression was serious, but there was a flicker of something softer in her eyes, a sign that the investigation was reaching a critical moment. The passengers turned expectantly, the air thick with anticipation. Lisa's voice was calm but firm. "We have obtained a confession." A hush fell over the cabin. Emily has admitted to possessing the stolen documents and attempting to smuggle them. A collective intake of breath swept through the passengers. The woman who had seemed so frightened now stood revealed as the central figure in this tangled web. Emily was escorted forward, her face pale but resolute. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling but steady. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was coerced. I was forced into this by people who threatened my family." Her confession hung heavy in the air, casting new light on the situation. The motives were no longer simple. They were tangled in fear, desperation, and survival. Jake listened intently, empathy growing within him. This was no cold-hearted criminal. This was a person caught in circumstances beyond her control. Sarah reached out, squeezing Jake's hand, and he knew they were not alone in feeling the complex truth. Lisa nodded in acknowledgement. We are working to ensure the safety of everyone involved and to uncover those responsible for coercing Emily." The passengers seemed to relax slightly, the tension easing just enough to allow a fragile hope to bloom. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, signaling a new day and perhaps a new beginning. Inside the plane, despite the long night and the unsettling revelations, there was a sense that justice and truth might prevail. Jake leaned back, exhausted but relieved. The flight that had taken off normally and landed unexpectedly early had become a journey into the shadows, but now, maybe it was heading toward the light. The first pale light of dawn crept through the plane's windows, casting long shadows across the cabin where passengers sat in a weary silence. The hours of tension and uncertainty had worn on everyone's nerves, but now, with Emily's confession, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Less fear, more cautious hope. Jake glanced around, noting the tired but relieved faces. The nightmare was not over, but the path toward resolution had begun. Lisa Harper and the Homeland Security agents gathered near the front of the plane, deep in discussion. Suddenly, a man stepped forward, a rugged figure in a plain black jacket, introduced as Agent Mark Davis. His presence brought a new energy, a sense of renewed determination. He approached Emily carefully, offering a reassuring nod. "We're here to help," he said quietly. "You're not alone in this." Jake watched as Emily's shoulders seemed to relax just slightly. The introduction of Agent Davis felt like a turning point, a beacon amid the lingering shadows. The agents began coordinating plans to safely transfer Emily and secure the sensitive materials she carried. The operation was delicate. Any misstep could escalate the crisis. Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah found themselves drawn into conversations with other passengers, strangers brought together by fate. Stories and fears were shared, alliances formed. The ordeal had transformed the cabin into a tight-knit community, united by shared vulnerability. Jake realized that in moments of crisis, humanity often revealed its best side. As Agent Davis explained the next steps, Jake felt a surge of gratitude for the professionals working tirelessly behind the scenes. The plane, once a vessel of mystery and danger, was now a place where truth and justice were being pursued with care and precision. Outside, ground crews prepared for the next phase. Emergency vehicles lining the runway, flashing lights painting the night in urgent colors. The early morning chill was a stark contrast to the stifling tension inside. The outside world was ready to welcome them back, to bring closure to a harrowing ordeal. Jake caught Sarah's eye and smiled faintly. "We made it through the night," he said quietly. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "And now it's time to finish this." The flight that took off normally and landed 3 hours earlier than expected was nearing its end. But the story of courage, truth, and unexpected allies was far from over. The early morning sunlight poured softly through the plane's windows, casting a warm glow over the weary faces of the passengers. The tension that had gripped them for hours was finally beginning to ease, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Jake sat back in his seat, letting out a deep breath as he reflected on the turbulent journey that had unfolded. What began as a routine flight had turned into an intense, unexpected ordeal that none of them would soon forget. Emily, now calm but guarded, was carefully escorted by Agent Mark Davis toward the awaiting authorities on the tarmac. The agents moved with precision and professionalism, ensuring her safety while beginning to unravel the larger conspiracy behind the stolen documents. Jake watched the scene unfold, feeling a mix of emotions: sympathy for the woman who had been coerced, gratitude for the swift response of the security teams, and a quiet satisfaction that justice was being pursued. Sarah leaned over, her eyes meeting Jake's with a shared understanding. "It's been a long night, but I'm glad it's finally coming to an end," she whispered. Jake nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The passengers around them exchanged tired smiles and relieved sighs, the shared experience having forged unexpected bonds among strangers. As the plane prepared for departure once more, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Thank you all for your patience and cooperation. We will be taking off shortly to complete our journey. The announcement was met with a round of quiet applause, an acknowledgement of the endurance and resilience everyone had shown. Jake glanced around the cabin one last time, noticing the subtle shifts in atmosphere. What had been a space filled with suspicion and fear was now a place of calm and cautious optimism. The passengers had faced uncertainty together and had come through stronger. Outside, the sun climbed higher, signaling the start of a new day and a fresh chapter for everyone aboard. As the plane finally took off, Jake felt a profound sense of closure and hope. The flight that had landed 3 hours earlier than expected was now completing its course, carrying with it stories of courage, truth, and the unyielding human spirit. The plane soared smoothly through clear skies, the sunlight streaming warmly into the cabin, casting a golden glow over the passengers who were now relaxed and quietly chatting. After the long, tense ordeal, there was a sense of calm, a shared relief that the nightmare was behind them. Jake gazed out the window, watching the patchwork fields of the American Midwest stretch beneath them, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The flight that had taken off normally and landed unexpectedly early had turned into a journey none would ever forget, but it was finally moving toward closure. Sarah sat beside him, her hand in his, her smile gentle but tired. "We made it," she said softly, echoing the unspoken feeling that filled the cabin. Jake nodded, his heart full of gratitude for her steady presence through the chaos. The bond forged in uncertainty now felt unbreakable. As the plane approached their destination, the captain's voice came over the intercom, warm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for your patience and cooperation. Your safety was, and always will be, our top priority." The passengers responded with quiet applause, some wiping tears, others exchanging knowing glances, survivors bound by shared experience. Once on the ground, the scene was calm but thorough. Authorities moved efficiently, escorting Emily into custody with dignity, ensuring the sensitive information she carried was secure. The investigation would continue, but the immediate danger had passed. For Jake and the others, this was the beginning of healing. As they disembarked, Jake took a deep breath of the fresh, cool air, feeling the weight of the past hours begin to fade. The airport buzzed with the normal rhythm of arrivals and departures, a sharp contrast to the stillness inside the plane hours earlier. Life, unpredictable and relentless, moved on. Jake glanced at Sarah, their smiles reflecting hope. "This flight, it changed everything," he said. "But maybe it also reminded us what really matters: courage, honesty, and sticking together." She nodded, eyes shining with quiet determination. "A new beginning," she agreed. The flight had landed 3 hours earlier than expected, but in that time, it had delivered a story of resilience, unexpected alliances, and truth prevailing over fear. And for Jake, Sarah, and everyone aboard, it was a journey that would resonate long after the final descent, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey, one that began as a routine flight but transformed into a gripping tale of courage, secrets, and unexpected hope. Stories like these remind us that even in the most uncertain moments, the human spirit shines brightest. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss an exciting new adventure. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions, so leave a comment below and share your opinions with us. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more captivating stories every week. Until next time, stay curious and keep believing in the extraordinary